Hello and welcome to Peer to Peer. Admittedly, I'm not in the capital city this evening, but my guests are in respective capitals. I'm joined by two fine journalists in the South Dakota State Government Press Corps, Dakota News Now's Austin Goss and Forum News Services' Chris Vondrachek. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Hey.
This conversation is being recorded at 4:15 Central on Tuesday evening, so things are subject to change. Gentlemen, I want you to wander back with me, if you will, to last week during Veto Day. We all know the outcome of that day. The Republican-led House rejected Governor Kristi Noem's style and form veto overwhelmingly. Chris, I believe you dubbed it the Wall of Red. Talk a little bit about the House's concerns with Noem's style and form veto.
Right. So if you break it into like three kind of camps, there was about, I think initially maybe 17 members of the House representatives voted against 1217 the first go around. And those folks, by and large, opposed it the second go around. But of course, the vote was 67-2. So clearly some people had jumped ship to say they were going to be opposed to Governor Noem's style and form veto. We can talk about the kind of semantics of what exactly it was. But basically, all but two of the members of the House voted red on her recommendations for revisions. And the people who joined up with the folks who initially opposed the bill were mostly folks who either broke into the camp of they felt like she was expanding the powers of the style and form veto beyond kind of grammatical revisions or sort of stylistic suggestions to something that was more substantive. And then you had a second group of folks who largely felt like the governor was watering down the bill. She was chucking out the NCAA portion of it. She was including some stuff about affidavits and birth certificates for proving your sex or proving your gender identity. That kind of ruffled folks the wrong way, and they ended up in like en masse, like all but Larry Tiedemann and Dave Anderson voted in opposition to her recommendations.
Moments after the House tried to override what essentially became a veto, Governor Noem issued two executive orders and said she wants to call a special session in late May or early June. However, it got interesting when the Senate started adjourning for the year while the House was still considering a veto override. Austin, what do you think that means for the Senate's position when it comes to the Women's Fairness in Sports bill?
I think it's very clear what the Senate's stance on this is. And we go back to just before veto day, Governor Noem threatened to call a special session the following day. Veto day, of course, is on a Monday, I believe the 29th. She threatened to call him back for Tuesday, to take up just 1217. So clearly there was conversations had in the Senate. And, I would assume the governor's office must have communicated with senators to see what an appetite might be for this bill. And we have to remember 1217, despite having passed the Senate, wasn't passed convincingly through the Senate, of course, had to be smoked out. So I think the fact that the Senate, adjourned for the year and we are now talking about a special session sometime down the road, sometime in May, sometime in June, maybe, shows that the Senate is clearly not inclined to change their stance on this issue or clearly inclined to take this issue up. They think that it's a non-issue. There's, of course, no transgender high school athletes currently partaking in sports in South Dakota. And as far as the NCAA, that's an uphill battle. I don't think they're inclined to move. And again, I think the fact that there wasn't a special session the following day, pretty much like the governor had threatened to call, shows that the Senate isn't going to move on this issue for as far as we can see.
Moving on, the governor has spent some time talking about President Joe Biden's infrastructure plan on Fox News and in her weekly column. Chris, you've done some reporting on what the infrastructure bill would do for South Dakota. Walk us through the infrastructure needs that we have and the politics of it.
Totally. Well, the big one would be $620 billion from President Biden's proposed infrastructure bill would go to kind of what we consider kind of core infrastructure, sort of roads, bridges, transportation infrastructure. And South Dakota, according to a national trade group, has the fourth worst rate or best rate, or I guess highest rate, depending upon how you look at it, of structurally deficient bridges, trailing Iowa, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. And so South Dakota is in need of fixing bridges, either those that the state owns or state repairs that are 20 foot and over, or some of the smaller bridges that kind of fall upon the counties and the townships. And the state basically relies upon a ton of federal money to help fix those bridges. And so in one way, even though the federal delegation of Senators Thune and Rounds and Congressman Dusty Johnson have been kind of publicly, I guess, less than warm to the Biden proposal, it probably would, at least through the prism of bridge infrastructure, help the state out a lot in kind of catching up to sort of a mean level where we can be more trustworthy in terms of these bridges. And they're not going to fall down. Like, we're not facing necessarily a situation where, you know, we're going to have what happened up in Minneapolis 13 years ago, 14 years ago. But there are a number of places where the absence of a bridge or a strong, dependable bridge has meant that the bridges have had to close down, or we've had to go to one lane. So west of Salem, I chatted with a woman named Kathy Rowling, who lives out in the country. And when the bridge went down to a single lane, there was actually a number of accidents that were happening because of that. And they had to eventually, and then some large farm equipment came over that bridge and basically destroyed it. And so she would have to get to Salem, which is 2.5 miles away. All of a sudden, she was being sent miles north, and then miles east, and then miles south. And so in terms of the politics, we'll see what happens. The Senate parliamentarian just suggested that Democrats won't need basically any Republican votes to pass this, because they can pass it through reconciliation. But I think that, you know, when you get perhaps some of these Republican congressmen behind the closed door, they might say, actually, we could use this money locally.
How would either of you contextualize Governor Noem's role then on the national front when it comes to responding to this major package coming out of Washington?
So what I would say is this, is that so Noem was on a phone call with other governors and the White House last week. And then she went on Sean Hannity's show, basically said, the governors, we're hearing about Green New Deal stuff, and we're hearing about pipes, and we're hearing about sort of pet projects that don't have anything to do with South Dakota infrastructure. And that's, in some respects, kind of mirrors the comments that I heard from Thune's office, as well as when I spoke with Congressman Dusty Johnson last week. However, Noem is obviously she doesn't have a vote in the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House. However, she is increasingly, kind of coalesced some energy on the political right. And as a state governor, I think she does what she says does matter for a lot of folks who are watching this debate. It was interesting, I thought, to notice, just to sort of as a reflection point to her impact. This past Sunday, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was on George Stephanopoulos' show, and he actually responded. He actually invoked Noem's, said the governor of South Dakota is, saying we're spending money on pipes. Well, actually, part of infrastructure includes plumbing, includes pipes. We have a real problem in this country of lead pipes or sort of lead poisoning in these pipes. And we need to update that infrastructure. And so, forget sort of the commentary about pipes or not, which drew a lot of political or kind of Twitter interest. It was certainly telling that, again, like a sitting secretary, cabinet secretary would almost sort of directly respond to Governor Noem's comments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think too, and Chris kind of touched on this, obviously, it's interesting, especially when you talk about contextualizing her opposition to the transportation bill, how I think that kind of ties back into 1217. I think in conservative circles, and of course, again, the Tucker Carlson interview that Noem did got reference, in conservative circles, Noem's response to 1217 really hurt her image on a national level and hurt her image in, circles of conservatives like the Sean Hannity viewers and the Tucker Carlson viewers. And so now you have this bill. And her stance isn't a radical departure from Senator Thune's or Senator Rounds, or Dusty Johnson, or Representative Johnson's. It's not a radical departure, but given that she is playing to a national audience and she's being pushed to speak on issues like this, or vaccine passports, or when you have Ron DeSantis banning vaccine passports in Florida, and you have Greg Abbott banning them in Texas, as a governor who is eyeing a possible presidential bid in 2024, I think you're pushed to the stage a little bit more than, North Dakota's governor, who's not playing to the same audience that Governor Noem is. I think when you put her response to 1217 and the feedback she got for her veto of that in conservative circles, in the context of how she's out front on this transportation bill now, and provoking a response from the transportation secretary, it all kind of adds up, and it just is part of the broader theme that she's playing to a much, much bigger audience than just South Dakota.
My guests have been Dakota News Now's Austin Goss and Forum News Services' Chris Vondracek. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me on Peer to Peer.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Thanks for having us, Lee. Appreciate it.